Hi, friends. First of all, I would like you to welcome you all again for the today's session. Today, it is very important session in terms of security. That is nothing but the five elements of AAA. Actually, I am saying AAA, which are the part of five elements. They are together. If someone has to broader aspect, they want to speak, they will say AAA. But these are the five elements which make any system stringent if properly implemented. In terms of having a proper access control to the rightful users and giving the rightful privileges to do certain operations which they are entitled as part of the system can be effectively achieved when you have these principles properly implemented. If I want to give the brief about these five elements are nothing but the identification, authentication, authorization, auditing, and accounting. These are the five fundamental pillars, which is the essential for having any system or any data. If you want to protect, if you are trying to implement any security control and access control, they have to backed by these five elements. If you see, the first element, identification, is tend to, before you are trying to access any system, claiming that this is my identity to access a system. That is what we called as identification. So authentication is a way the validation part of claimed identity is going to care take care at the authentication level. Means, let's say I came and say that my name is Mohan Vamsi. Immediately you will ask some authentication factor. Let's say it may be my Aadhaar card or PAN card through which you had validated it's actually me. That is what we called as authentication. Initially I made a claim saying that this is me, and subsequently I had given my card, which is Aadhaar card or parent card or passport card, which you had validated me based on the claim I made earlier. Subsequently we have authorization. So this is the what the fundamental idea of authorization is: defining the permissions. See, you take any system in the security, it is not like that all critical entities in terms of resources or data or information, it is not entitled to access by every member who is accessing the system based on his privileges, his controls, his level of whether he is really entitled to access that particular resource or information. Based on that only we will give the access. That is where that validating whether he is the rightful person to access and defining a permission whether he can access such resource. So that granular defining is going to take care at the level of authorization. So basically this is the place where you are, whether you are entitled to a resource, you are successfully able to receive that access to that resource, or you will be going to deny. And the next thing is auditing. See, this is having very important significance in the security. It is because the moment you want to maintain security means the actions which are taking part as part of the system has to be somewhere logged. Then only people are also very cautious in performing their actions, believing that someone is going to monitor them, record their events such that they will have complete focus when you are performing certain actions while accessing the critical systems. And accountability. See, if you don't have proper auditing and proper authentication, it is very difficult to make accounting. So accounting is to make someone accountable. See, for every action in the system, you should make the corresponding identity who is responsible for that action. The bring the compliance and accountability, who is accessing what system. So if you see, AAA is not just, it is something like, it is just simple, it is beyond the authentication. It is the foundational security concept for any system. If you want to have a successful system where you want to ensure the people are doing actions rightfully in the system, means this AAA is very, very important. Means that authentication, authorizing, and accountability. These are the fundamental things which are very, very essential. Maybe you may confuse like why I had skipped the auditing. Let me explain in the subsequent slides why I said AAA means authentication, authorization, and accountability. So, but you remember these 5 elements are very essential. Omitting any element as part of this implementation will totally weakens the security, right? If you don't follow rightly implementations of these things, 5 elements, it ends up with bad security. Now, the first fundamental element in the 5 elements is identification. See, maybe you are wondering like it is 5 elements, why people are saying AAA? They're telling about authentication, authorization, and accountability, but they're excluding identification, and other thing is nothing but the auditing. So I will explain. See, the first step in authentication, authorization, and accountability is the identification. If you see in your general day-to-day observations, you can see that when you are accessing a webmail or email, you are providing a username entry. When you are going to your office to go into the office, maybe you are using a smart card swipe, or sometimes proximity devices you may use. Maybe your office having a biometric scan like a face recognition, hand recognition, fingerprint, voice, etc. Anything of biometrical factors they may are considering for the authentication. So without identification, authentication is impossible. What I mean is, you are generally in the broader way, you thinks that I am authenticating to the system, but you are indirectly performing the identification. So I think now I made a clarity like identification is something tightly coupled with the authentication. That's why they had not kept explicitly I. They kept authentication, but authentication is never able to achieve without identification. It is tightly integrated part of authentication. You got right? Before going to the authentication, the first and fundamental step is having identification. Now, how the identification to authentication happens? See, identification will help to link actions to an identifier, because each and every system does not know whether it is me or the persons who are listening these sessions. The system is unable to understand and identify based on my name or human something. It needs identification. Some uniqueness has to be there into the system through which it will track the actions made by the individual persons who are accessing. So IT system basically try to access this information. It is based on the accounts. It does not know about who individual. Let me say a simple example. When I am accessing Gmail, he does not really know whether it is Mohan Mamsi or some X or something, John or a other person. He merely focus on username, nothing but the Gmail and the corresponding password, which are the primary factors to distinguish me from some other person. So this is the fundamental aspects of identification. And you remember one thing, merely giving an identity, it does not mean that my access to the system is granted. See, but I want to convey here, I'm just saying access is granted, not resources allocated. Let me come into the authorization. Here, claiming an identity means access has been granted to the system. So authentication is required to verify identity before allowing the access, right? See, if I given the simply Gmail without giving password, Gmail account, mail account without giving password, am I entitled to access the Gmail? No, right? So claiming an identity does not mean you are authorized to access the system. You have to be proved that you are the rightful person to access the system by providing the rightful authentication factors which are known to the system earlier. That is what called as authentication. That's why I'm saying that identification and authentications are very tightly integrated. They can't be separated. That's why they kept simply AAA authentication, which means inherently talking about the identification. Now, what is the focus of authentication? Means verifying the identity. So authentication confirms the claimed identity. Let's say I came with proving to the Google Gmail server saying that this is my mail ID and I am giving my password. Then it is a process has been initiated of authentication based on my claimed identity, which is nothing but my Gmail. So it requires some additional information. That is what we call as authentication factor. Here the authentication factor is your password. So password based verification is generally one way of authentication factor which we'll try to see in every day-to-day aspects, right? So compares against the factors which are known to the system earlier when you are onboarding onto the system. See, the first time you are part of the system, you created a unique username, that is mail ID and password. So that is known to the system, which is you had gone in the process of sign up as part of onboarding activity, which is later point of time whenever you are again came back to access the system, it is able to validate against the authentication factors which you had shared earlier to the system. So if you observe one point here, the security is totally very keen, and the security is very successfully able to achieve when we are properly securing the authentication factors, right? See, let's say if I want my Gmail account or my webmail account has to be secure, means I have to ensure the secrecy in the sensitive information, which is nothing but my password. Let's say my bank account is there, it knows about my username and password. The secrecy lies on the password, which is very important factor. So to simply say your system will remain, means your individual data or something system is, it is much more remains secure when you are very cautiously taking care how to protect these authentication factors. So this is the fundamental idea of how the security can be achieved when you have successful brain thought or introspection to protect the authentication factors. Now, authentication and identification is two-step process. As I mentioned, like they are intercoupled. So whenever you are trying to access a resource, you provide an identity with username and ID code. Then subsequently you will provide the authentication factors like password or PIN. So it is a fact known that both are required. I can't access any system merely providing Gmail account ID without having password. Both are required. So, but sometimes you may feel, okay, I am merely pressing the PIN. I am not giving authenticating sometimes. Sometimes let's say that you went to your office and you have some biometric pin or scan something, is you're simply doing the one factor of authentication. You will feel like that means you're just giving the authentication, but indirectly you are identified by having your physical presence. Let's say in my office there is a server room which is properly protected by having a pin which is known to very few people of the organization. So the pin I could able to enter when I physically present before the server room gate, right? Means indirectly my identification has been done earlier before I reach to the server room, right? So authentication may be implicitly, sometimes it may happen based on the location based access also. That is what you are not explicitly providing identification, it seems to be, but somehow it is backed by the identification during that process. That's why we can't never separate authentication and identification. Now coming to the other aspect is authorization. Authorization is controlling the access. For example, simple use case. Let's say we are having a school system, a school database management system, which is having marks being stored, attendance, everything. See, the same system may be accessed, the database may be accessed by multiple people, maybe different roles. Let's say it could be a student, it could be a teacher, it could be a parent, it could be a principal. So when a single system of database accessed by different perspective of people, there should be different authorization levels. A student should be able to access only the seeing of the marks. A teacher have the ability to tweak the marks or modify and enter the marks. A parent should have the ability to know the attendance of their child. So it is the same system where data is being maintained, but based on your identity and authentication factors, whether you are the right person to access certain resources will be decided. That is nothing but the authorization. So this is primarily comes into the picture once you did the authentication. As a parent, you have certain credentials and identity. As a teacher, they may have certain identity and credentials. As a principal, he will have certain identity and credentials. Based on their identification and authentication factors, they will be subsequently analyzed by the system. They are rightful authorized to do the certain actions. So it is simply based on the subject. Means a subject is a person who is submitting the identity and authentication to the system. Object is he is trying to access certain resource in the system, and the authorization process which will try to validate that he is having the rightful permissions as part of the system rules, whether he is entitled to access. So now you should remember, if someone authenticate to the system means he is not authorized to do everything by default. So a person who is having authentication, you should not simply consider he is authorized to do anything. So authorization, you should never interpret it is just simply an authentication. You should believe that authorization never similar to authentication. It is something beyond. Being an authentication means it does not mean that you are fully granted any resource. Access can be granular. Let's say in system only, sometimes you could able to read a file but you could not delete. Sometimes you could able to print a file but you can't edit the content in that file. So having proper controls over system resource can be successfully achieved with having rightful authorization. Now comes the important thing is auditing. You remember I said like accountability. AAA means authentication, authorization and accountability. Auditing means it is very important thing. See, if I want to make someone accountable means I have to first I have a system where auditing mechanism is in place. Means it is a system where you're logging the events performed by every authenticated user as part of the system. I am trying to come to my office. At the security, every time they will try to enter my entry time and exit time. This is nothing but the auditing. The track and records of user activities are maintained for the later using at the accountability to make some actions liable. Means simple. Let's say For example, I'm trying to go to the office morning 9 a.m. and evening 5:30 I am coming back. So every time security person is entering, I am coming at 9 and leaving at 5:30. Let's say a some an incident which is happened, which is not correctly should be happened, has happened in premises of my place where I used to work. In my room, there is some incident happen. So then that incident definitely will happen if someone triggers some event. So let's say if you see that incident happen around 7:30 p.m. So my records can prove that I came at 9, I left at 5:30. So that particular action is not triggered by me. Let's say that incident happened in between 9 to 5:30 because of my explicit negligence or something. So later point of I can't deny because it is already recorded in the system that I came at 9 and left organization at 5:30. So track and record user activities for later point of time to bring accountability. Very simple. Auditing means recording the events such that you can make someone accountable later point of time. He can't deny. In system, if you want to track or something events, you need the auditing. Detects unauthorized or abnormal actions can be definitely, we can able to identify if you are having auditing. In future, if you want to have a audit trails, it can be successfully done through log files if you have proper this auditing mechanisms. So investigation intrusions and failures, reconstructing an event timelines. Let's say that a breach has happened, how this series of events happened. So when there is proper mechanism of auditing is there, it will help. Even if you have to prove something in court, something like it is happened, this series of events have happened in the proper order or sequence of timelines, so that time sometimes it becomes a legal evidence to prove someone guilty or to do an analysis. So this is essentially important. So security monitoring or forensic analysis or compliance, if you have these requirements, auditing is very important. Of course, a lot of operating systems and applications and services by default they are now coming with implementing this auditing as part of the system during the design and development phase such that they are properly tracked. So this auditing is very important for enforcing security and make someone accountable. So if I make accounting ensures enforcement of security policies. So it will make someone liable means it will properly helps to implement the security policies, because the people are very conscious like that if this particular unethical which is it could not be practiced, if you are concerned with security, if he is doing something wrong, he will have some insight that okay, someone is trying to do auditing, means someone is going to monitor, I should behave in a best way. So this will indirectly helps to adhere to the security policies if you have accountability. Holding a subject accountable for their actions indirectly make him to follow the best practices. He will see, but you remember that if you want to have right accountability means there should be uncompromised identification and authentication. Means see, if your system itself very bad enough to know how who is doing what improperly, there is a some weakness in identification and authentication means what is the purpose of having accountability? Then it is very easily tamperable. So identification, authentication, authorization and auditing, these are the fundamental pillars to have the rightful accountability. As I mentioned that strong authentication is very critical. If you have weak authentication, it creates doubt about accountability, right? See, let's say that my system is very, very careful in doing the authentication means people are having belief that okay, it is 100% do perfectly in authentication, so I can have the right audit logs. I will have right accountability, I can make that. If let's say that if I have no confidence, let's say that I am there at the security gate, but I don't know who is coming. I may say that, okay, maybe John seems is to come. No, 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 no. Sometimes I will say that John maybe, otherwise Akash. I don't know. Someone means lack of clarity in the authentication brings the problems to achieve right accountability. So having rightful authentication, identification, and auditing and authorization, these are the fundamental things to have a rightful accountability. And even if you want to have legal accountability, means you did something rightfully, so to back your decisions defensible in the court of law, okay, we followed everything, you can see this log and everything, but still somehow, so to prove something, like to defend in terms of some actions, let's say that a person has did some wrong and he's telling that I had not did this action, he did some wrong action which he is not authorized to do in his organization, he did, but he's later point of denying. But once if I have rightful accountability which is backed by rightful auditing, he can't deny, I can have legal defense, how I can defend this my argument. But remember, weak authentication creates doubts in accountability. As I mentioned, the accountability can be successfully achieved when you have stronger authentication. But now, passwords are only one factor of authentication. There is a chance of compromise. Let's say my password, if is the one of the factor, maybe because of something, someone has, other person has able to know that information, means he could also enter that password. Then because of only one factor of authentication, there is a chance like that I may be become guilty, but though I am not doing, then we need the multi-factor authentication. Let's say if there are multiple factors for authentication, let's say I can say that, oh, somehow because of something happened, because of the vulnerability or something happened, because of password has been known to someone who is intercepting my traffic. But let's say that in that authentication you need the smart card also. You can't say that, okay, someone has made you to trap to the phishing attack or something, they came to know about your password because of social engineering attack or something, but they could not access your smart card, right? They could not access your fingerprint, right? So the more the factors for authentication, it should be much secure. So that is what we call multi-factor authentication, which is backed by something you know, which is password, something you have, which is your smart card, something you are, which is your unique fingerprint. The biometric factor comes in something you are. Of course, we will see in the subsequent classes in detail what is multi-factor. So multi-factor minimizes the impersonation risks. It will make the accountability more reliable and accurate. This is one of the important things we should remember. Let me conclude with this slide today's session. Monitoring and auditing. These terms seems to be same, but remember one thing. I'll say simple, easy. Monitoring is a thing which you should do if you want to perform auditing. Means simple. Let's say if I want to know who is entering to my organization premises, means first I need a security guard person. Whether he will note down that so and so John has come at morning 9 and he left at 5:30 is different, but he's every person entering into the organization he's watching. That is merely we call it as monitoring. Monitoring means it is just watching the activities, but auditing means watching these activities and recording in the system for a later point of time for the access. That is what we call it, recording the monitored data into logs. That is what we call auditing. In the system, every time we will log the information which we monitor with having rightful identification mapped into the systems. That is what I mean the key difference. You can monitor without auditing, means you can monitor without logging that information, but you cannot audit, you can't log without if you don't monitor. But both are essential for the security and compliance. You have to remember that both are very, very important. That's it for today. We'll come with some important and interesting concept in the next session. Thank you.